President Biden has signed an executive order that requires all government employees and employees of government contractors to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Biden's latest measure to combat the virus does not offer an opt-out option being vaccinated through regular testing, which stands in contrast to the administration's previous mandates. During his announcement, Biden also spoke out against governors who are failing to do their part to fight the virus.
If these governors won't help us beat the pandemic, I'll use my power as president to get them out of the way.
More than 17 million healthcare workers employed at medical facilities that receive government funding from Medicare and Medicaid, like hospitals, home care facilities, and dialysis centers, will also be required to be vaccinated. President Biden's federal workers mandate will most certainly create a significant boom in the number of Black people getting vaccinated. As of 2017, the federal government employed more than 360,000 Black workers, more than all other minority groups combined. Furthermore, 16% of the 18.6 million people that work in the field of healthcare are Black. Joining us now is Assistant Professor of Emergency Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Dr. Cedric Dark. Dr. Dark, so the vaccination rates in the Black community have been lagging behind other groups. What do you think that this mandate of federal employees, people who, very often in the Black community have some sort of standing where people respect, they work at the post office or they have, some federal government job. Will that, number one, boost the numbers just because they have to get vaccinated, but also maybe have an impact on other people who are reluctant to get vaccinated because they think something will happen to them, to see these people all get vaccinated?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that, number one, it's about time the Biden administration started to use all of the tools that it has at its disposal to get this pandemic under control. And that, includes using the federal government as an employer to make sure that their employees are vaccinated and that there's healthy and safe working spaces there. So again, this is impacting about 2 million federal employees. You stated the numbers of what percentage of those federal employees are Black, which is good because there has been a lot of hesitancy in getting our population vaccinated against this disease. This is great because it also hits federal contractors, which means if you're, one of these defense contractors or some other kind of private entity that's trying to do business with the federal government, your employees have to be vaccinated too if you're going to try to do business. And using things like OSHA regulations, which are commonly used in places like healthcare to mandate whether or not we can have sips of water while we're working in the ER, we're actually going to use that for good and actually say, you know what, every doctor, every nurse, every person in the hospital needs to be vaccinated. Wouldn't you want to make sure that when you show up to a hospital that your hospital workers are actually vaccinated against this virus?
I'm glad you brought that up because, Biden even went further and announced some measures where you could fine companies if their employees were not vaccinated. Do you think the administration is now moving into more of a strong arm set of tactics against the unvaccinated? And do you think as a society, that's where we're going? We're no longer coddling people because they're unvaccinated, forcing people now to become vaccinated?
I mean, some people might try to suggest that this goes too far, but, it's not even going far enough yet. We're not requiring vaccinations for people getting on airplanes, for people getting on trains like Amtrak, people getting on buses that are going across state lines. And, those are another area that the administration could still do if they wanted to. What we're doing is correcting the errors of governors in places like Florida and Texas that haven't allowed localities to have their own vaccine mandates or haven't allowed schools to have mask mandates and things like that. And so using the tools of the federal government where it can in order to encourage vaccinations or incentivize vaccination, even if it has to come in the form of a stick, is what we have to do, because as we can see, the carrots have stopped working.
Do you think that that states will follow the federal government's guidance here and you'll see a succession of states start to mandate vaccination for all state employees?
I really hope so. I think one of the biggest problems that I've had where I am is that our leadership hasn't led, with a good example, an evidence-based example, in order to get people vaccinated or masked or, whatever it has been throughout this pandemic in order to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to bring an end to it. So by showing leadership, and which is something that when this pandemic started, we didn't have great leadership going in, it's something that will hopefully trickle down to governors, to mayors, county executives, to whomever else is in leadership positions, whether it's, private sector CEOs as well. Because again, if we're going to get out of this, we really have to use all the tools in our armamentarium.
Many of the governors you were talking about are not acting out of public health concerns. They're acting out of political concerns. The number of, cases going through the roof does not move them. The number of people dying does not move them. Biden today seemed to offer something of a threat to them. What do you think it will take, other than their poll numbers sinking, to move these governors to consider public health over politics?
That's a question I can't answer. You'd have to ask them. I would just have to say to the people that think that the federal government can't do this, right? There are even politicians that think that the federal government isn't allowed to impose mandates. But you know what? The Supreme Court says that that's something we can do. I'm going to quote something to you that says, "Real liberty for all cannot exist under the operation of a principle which recognizes the right of each individual person to use their own liberty, regardless of the injury that may be done to others." This was a Supreme Court case, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, which was passed in the early 1900s, when one person in Massachusetts didn't want to get vaccinated against smallpox, and the fine was $5. And they essentially sued the state over that $5 and went all the way up to the Supreme Court and said, you know what, the state and the government does have a right to protect other people's health. When we talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, life comes first, because without that, you're not going to have liberty. And if you don't have liberty, you're not going to be able to do the things that make you happy. And so, again, I think it's really important that we realize that what people need to do is to take control of this pandemic themselves. Go ahead, get your shot. And we're in a situation where 15% of all Americans can't get vaccinated. And you know who that is? Those are our kids. Our kids under 12 are not able to be vaccinated yet. And we're not going to be able to end this pandemic, unless everybody decides to do their part. We have 278 million people above the age of age 12. You can, try to vaccinate all of them, and we've vaccinated about 181 million. But there's at least 60 to 80 million people that haven't received a single shot yet. And, some people want to talk about natural immunity. Yes, we have 40 million people that have natural immunity because they contracted the disease. But as a consequence of that, 653,000 Americans have died. That's a really tough way to get immunity, by allowing over 600,000 people to die. It's a whole lot better to get a vaccine in your arm and get your immunity that way.
Are you optimistic that we actually can end the pandemic? Right now we realize that the effectiveness of the vaccine is waning a bit. We're going to have to eventually get boosters. At the same time, not enough people are getting vaccinated. We may never reach herd immunity. We are showing that we are doing a terrible job of dealing with a variant in the Delta variant, and that is not going to be the last variant. As long as there are this many unvaccinated people out there and the virus keeps getting passed around among them, it will mutate. Are you still confident that we can push past this thing, or is this just going to be with us in some form?
I think in some private discussions that I've held with other physicians, I think a lot of us are worried that this is going to just be something that will be with us forever at this point. I think we had an opportunity to put this fire out, but because of people's selfishness, because of people's convictions one way or the other, we haven't been able to do that. And so I do worry that we might not be able to get to where we need to get to actually end the pandemic. But I mean, we're not at a point of throwing the towel in. I mean, I think we still need to actually make an effort. And, you know, otherwise, why would I join you on your show to try to convince people to get vaccinated? You know, why would I do events and health fairs to try to get people to get vaccinated and answer their questions? You know, one of the things, you know, President Biden said today was calling on all doctors, primary care physicians, pediatricians, talk to your patients, try to answer the questions they have, get them over the hurdles that they might have about this vaccine, which is now fully FDA approved. The science is pretty strong for it. Hopefully they'll trust the vaccine and take the shot so that we can get there. But if we don't, if we you know, become complacent, then yeah, it may be around forever.
Dr. Cedric Dark, thank you so much for your time this evening. Coming up, the Department of Justice sues the state of Texas over new abortion laws. All eyes will be on Texas later on Prime. Keep it right here. You're watching BNC.